Hi, everyone. The next session is one that I'm particularly excited about. Our speaker is Logan McLeod. As the director of the Strategic Incubation Office at General Motors, Logan is responsible for solving impossible technology problems and laying the foundation of the next generation of technology services and capabilities at GM. His organization is the driving force behind vehicle telemetry and motorsports technologies, managing exabyte sized datasets. His priority is currently on delivering linear scale and continuously available architectures, powering connected vehicle applications, motorsports use cases that transcend the capabilities of current technology architectures. Speaking with Logan, Bill Cook, CEO of Yugabyte, and Karthik Ranganathan, co founder and CTO of Yugabyte, the topic of discussion is how Logan's team is building the data architecture for connected vehicles, self driving cars, and more. Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Tuda. Hey, Logan, welcome. Sounds like based on that introduction, you're an important guy for us to be talking to. So I appreciate you taking the time here. And maybe Suda set it up, but I think, from my perspective, these sessions are about how do we think about driving innovation in large enterprises, both the technology side of it, but probably as importantly, more importantly, is really the people side of the equation and the organizational side, which I know is a hot topic for you that we'll get into here in a minute. And obviously, with us being the distributed SQL sponsor of this for database technology, it's got a bit of a spin towards database technology and emerging trends. So we'll get into that here in a second. So to kick it off, I mean, I just thought I would share my personal history here of being from Detroit originally, and my career started off with General Motors and the automotive industry back in the day. Actually, I hate to date myself, but in the mid '80s, where there was a lot of, and this was at Sun Microsystems actually in the mid '80s. So it was engineering workstations, and you were thinking about what they called C4 back then, which was the union of CAD CAM, thinking about the engineering side, the manufacturing side. And I think the important part to me from that was just that how much General Motors and your heritage, that you were investing in the innovation side of technology and the way you thought about building cars and the rest of it. Obviously, you bought EDS along the way and launched things like OnStar to get started. So I think what struck me was the place and the role you played in the industry, and then more broadly how that rippled out into the ecosystem as we think about rather than just a vehicle manufacturer, if you will. And that you couldn't do it alone, even though you were big. It was really part of this bigger ecosystem. So just to fast forward, here we are a couple, 2-3 decades later, and you see digital everywhere. And I guess my first question for you is really, do you think of GM now? How do you think about GM? Is it really about the technology? Is it more of a software company these days, or how do you and the leadership team, Mary and the team, think about it?
Great question. For me, working at General Motors is a dream come true. It's a combination of personal and professional passions that I get to do on the daily. Right. I'm a car guy through and through. My first car was '72 Chevelle, and I had the opportunity to restore that. And so there's just a lot of parallels with GM. So when I got the opportunity about a decade ago to come solve technology problems at GM, sign me up. I think the transformation over the course of the last decade that I've been here at GM has been nothing short to, meeting the expectations of Ray Kurzweil and the singularity. Okay, blink and you'll miss it. The reality is that change is exponential in origin, and the same is true here at GM. Every time I turn around, there's another kind of business-led software development organization, where in this company, even a decade ago, everything's very, kind of hardware centric, and you've got a lot of engineers doing a lot of smart engineering things. And these days we spend just as much time having software architecture and engineering conversations around the vehicles that we're building here as we do anything else. And more often than not, we're talking about the back office side of it, the things that operate in GM's data centers across the globe. The fun thing for me at GM is understanding with the work that we're doing that we've already won. We're just waiting for the rest of the industry to figure that out. Folks would be amazed at the foundations we're laying, the bricks that we're putting on the road in the back office to make sure that, quite honestly, give me 20 million, give me 50 million vehicles all streaming telemetry data and multimedia data at 5G speeds, and we're good. We've already solved that problem. I'm not too worried about it, right? The questions and the things that we're focused on here today are really around not only the volumes and the availability and the expectations and just this, very kind of transcendent style of data management and handling it all. But, there's a rabid focus on things that deliver value directly to the consumer of GM products. So as you look at things that GM's producing that are getting critical accolades like Super Cruise and the forthcoming Ultra Cruise capabilities in our vehicles, and frankly the achievements that the Cruise subsidiary have demonstrated time and again, and they're now doing fully autonomous rides out in San Francisco, and there's a lot more to come there. The future is bright and it's opportunity rich, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's really thanks for sharing that. And I think, you hit on a couple of things here that I want to drill into a bit more. That you get shaped by your own experiences, right? So my experience at Pivotal of the whole DevOps, cloud native, helping build the middleware platform, we made a lot of progress on in the last decade at General Motors, as well as but the database tier seemed to lag. And it's really why Yugabyte exists. And maybe I'll ask Karthik to comment for a second. But before we get there about Yugabyte specifically, there's, I don't know, 250 databases out there or something like that. And you probably got a bunch of them there. Why another one? What are the attributes you're looking for if you think about the engine to power all the trends that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so there's for us, there's really two main components, right? Especially when we're thinking about scale. A lot of the things that we look at distributed SQL engines for is really supporting continuous availability of API service layers that protect and support, things like commands out to vehicles or APIs that we're subsequently using to power end user experiences, either in a vehicle or out on the web. The data behind that is key. And so we've got a few golden rules really around the platforms that we choose to put in place and supporting those API layers. And, there's a couple of them. Continuous availability. The reality is the business does not care that you had an event in the data center. They just really don't care. If it impacts a customer, we're going to have words, right? And so, my team understands that, if you cannot check the box on continuous availability and guarantee me 100% uptime, I'm not interested in your tech. I don't care what it does or how expensive it is. Nope, we're not going there. The other big element of this is around linear scalability, right? And you can approach this from a variety of different angles in terms of achieving the goal, whether it be logical segregation of workload or physical segregation of workload, depending on the architecture you deploy and your physical topology across the data centers. But for us, it's another one of those check the box type of opportunities that says, if you can't achieve it, I'm not interested in your tech, right? Because for us, connected vehicles every minute, seconds, every minute. We've got connected vehicles rolling off the assembly line, and people are buying them. With inventories being what they are in North America, every vehicle we can possibly produce for the next few years are automatically sold. They're going to lots, and off they go. Right? It'll take us a while to catch back up. So that's a good problem to have, and I think that the distributed SQL side of that really does a lot to power our direct end user experiences. Now, the backside of it, the non-distributed SQL side, is really a persistence layer for us. So as we think about how do I retain value of data that we've collected from vehicles and kind of deriving insights from them that are temporal in basis, right? As we think about trends of usage of features, capabilities, and these sorts of things that are over extended periods of time, be it months or years even. It's important that we're able to get at that data at scale. The reality is today, as we sit here, we're processing well over 1 million events per second coming in through our current architectures for just basic telemetry. It works out to well north of 30 billion transactions a day that we're processing in through the technology stacks that we've designed, implemented at scale. And frankly, we've had to create a bunch of technology along the way in order to achieve that, right? So the persistent side of it, which, we make a use of a lot of the traditional tools that you might expect, right? So there's a bunch of Hadoop in the ecosystem. The key, though, is none of this is segregated. It's all, enormous data lakes that are designed for end user accessibility inside the environment so that people can do data product development, right? They can create high value data assets inside our environment based off of telemetry and service consumption and learn on the daily how we can turn around and create even better and newer opportunities for our consumers. Often going back and leveraging data that we've had for years persisted in the data center, right? Now, it's super important, though, that I point out, as I talk about things that, GM does with telemetry data and whatnot, a lot of those systems were actually designed by my organization in terms of privacy and security. So the reality is I can't actually reverse engineer it back to an individual person. And, we care a lot about people's privacy and, the right to use and the terms of use that people sign up for when they're leveraging OnStar services and whatnot at GM.
That's great. And maybe Karthik, from your perspective, from the technology side and essentially why Yugabyte exists, if you could comment on that, because Logan hit on, a number of key attributes that, that you and Conan and Mikhail set off to solve for, of having a common API interface, if you will. How do you leverage the horsepower of something like Yugabyte, the continuous availability, the scalability, and then the privacy security attributes, which is so important to this new emerging world.
Absolutely. I think, Logan, you put it very well. I think I'll just recap it in terms of our experience and where we came from. Different place, like different space, but very similar learnings, right? Like effectively, it's a similar world in many senses, right? So, like our team, we cut our teeth running and building databases at Facebook, right? Like, I mean, so some of Kanan, one of my co-founders, he's been at Oracle before, but all three of us, we met at Facebook, and this was back in 2007, and there was really no database that could handle data that overflowed a single node, right? Whether it be storage or query processing, right? This was just the state of the world back then, and you had to do your own sharding. So we ended up building this database that could do something like that. And in taking an endeavor like that, you don't want to complicate anything. You just want to make it as simple as possible. So you're just delivering scale and availability. It was hard enough to do that, right? So we ended up building and open sourcing what you now know as Apache Cassandra back in Facebook, right? And back then it was simply about raw ability to handle, right, the horsepower and the incoming stream and keep it up and running and so on, right? But as we evolved and went through the various types of applications, again, very similar to how you put it, Logan, like we wanted the data in there, but we didn't know what kind of value added rich applications we'd build tomorrow, right? And even worse, we didn't know which ones of those would take off and which ones would not, and which ones would take off so fast that you had to now not fail because of your own success, right? You can't be telling users, oh, look, there's 10 million of users, other users that came on. Sorry, no service for you is not a good story, right? No one likes to hear that. So I think what we realized was it was important to have horizontal scalability where you can scale out and scale in on demand, and the ask upfront is not so high that you don't have to provision a lot upfront without knowing where the success of the application is going. And it's going to be this constant build and refine and build more and more microservices and applications on top, so that as you observe user patterns and behaviors and asks, you can react to them pretty quickly, right? So it then transformed into being able to do all of this as a platform while doing it at scale, making it operationally easy, making it secure, but still giving developers the power and the freedom to be able to build really quickly. And
I think one of the things you touched on in there is super important. My experience, I've been doing data management for 30 plus years. And the reality is people think about data way too late in the cycle. The only difference between our high performance organization and things that we do versus a traditional development team is our day one starts with data and laying that foundation. And you can read a whole bunch about fun theorem out there around information dominance and activity-based intelligence. And at their core begins the journey around acquisition and persistence of data that powers future knowledge. So I appreciate you saying that, because most people gloss right over it and they're caught with their pants down around their ankles 2 years from now, when they could have had an industry competitive advantage over everybody else if they had just started with capturing the data.
Absolutely, yeah. And the thing that we realized after, right, was that at places like Facebook, the databases that we built and open sourced were more around the access patterns of companies like Facebook, right? Where the scale is very high and the number of diverse set of applications which require completely different access patterns are not as wide as the enterprise, right? Like, so in enterprises, the scale may be a grade down, like it's still pretty high, but it may be a notch down from something like Facebook, but in aggregate across a variety of different applications, when you add it up, the scale goes right back up, right? So the difference is concentrated scale on a smaller set of use cases versus distributed scale across a wide variety of use cases, right? That's really one difference. And the second difference is, Facebook is at the end a tech company where, our users or consumers of the database were actually, developers in the company, and they would say, okay, this new database, new API. Oh, great. Not only is it like going to be fun for me to write this because everybody's excited about learning this new database.
I have never heard someone say it's fun to write against APIs, Karthik.
I know. That was.
Can I come work for you? Because if you figured out how to make it fun, I'm in the wrong line of business.
No, it's the end you achieve, right? Like I think companies such as Facebook, engineers thrive on building something new, and it's a tech world all the way, right? But when you now then put in terms of perspective how you can deliver value, right? I think you then realize that some of that fun has to be translated to a different space so that it can get delivered into value quicker, rather than the fun of building something new where it's like it's a lot of fun, but it's just a repetitive cycle. So now when you look at the wide access patterns of the enterprise, right, you don't have like a handful of developers working on just one app, which is super large. You have a few developers working on a large number of apps, and at which point it's no longer fun dealing with a new API because its vagaries get in the way. And you're now thinking about, how do you really future-proof yourself? How do you know that this database or whatever it is can actually serve you in the future? And it's not like you adopt it and 2 years, 3 years later, you have a few apps in production, and then you realize, oh, good God, this doesn't do my next flight. Now I can only add a new database back in production.
It's honestly why we spend a lot of time abstracting away the data away from arbitrary, decisions that you might make around proprietary data management solutions, the Oracles, the SQL servers of the world. They're great. They serve a purpose. They're often packaged with, higher order, higher purpose applications that you're buying off the shelf, software, etc. But even with those, we've introduced shims and layers that abstract the data away from those proprietary things, so that we're really looking at everything through a data-centric lens. Every system at GM that's been implemented for. So we literally acquire all of the data from all of our systems, be they transactional, be they reporting, be they warehousing style systems, and they all come into a central common repository that there is a massive amount of structure in terms of 360-degree views around particular subjects. Now, imagine what happens when we have data generating devices at the edge, your car, right? At the tune of millions of them traveling around North America and all points beyond 24/7. Imagine the opportunities that I've got to enrich data intersected with that telemetry stuff to create new business opportunities for GM that are extremely high margin, versus the thing that we produce. I'm a firm believer that over the coming years, the profit margins of companies, not just like GM, but the other OEMs that are out there as well, figuring this out, that the profit margins of these companies will end up ultimately becoming from the data that we produce and the insights that we produce from the physical asset that we've produced and ultimately sold, right? And the trick is making sure that those end user experiences of that asset, that vehicle that they've purchased, is ever present and ever renewing as they consume it over time, right? You should be able to get into your vehicle and see a new experience when that just downloaded to it the previous night, you got an update and here's a cool new feature for you, right? And that's very much the way that GM is thinking about these things these days, and it's a lot of fun to watch evolve behind the scenes.
Yeah. Okay, I was just thinking too, you think about where you're headed. I was looking at some of your presses around zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion, and then everything around electric vehicle. And then the scenario the picture you just painted about the future and what this technology, this baseline technology will enable. Can you share a bit more about, are there specific use cases that you can pursue now that just weren't possible 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and or assuming you're headed in that direction, like what are the challenges, what gets in the way of the progress on those use cases?
Yeah, it becomes a very interesting conversation very quickly, right? Because as you start thinking about municipalities and working with them and the infrastructure changes that are required on road to make EVs and autonomous vehicles work at scale, the interaction with the ecosystem, the interaction with other vehicles that are not only in their vicinity, but beyond their line of sight, the great work that the folks at Cruise do, and our Ultra Cruise, Super Cruise teams, the telemetry teams here at GM. There are literally hundreds of different use cases. You know what the common part about all of that, though, is telemetry systems and data acquisition and ingestion to persistence and being able to act upon that data in real time. And I think that's a super key thing that a lot of folks are missing right now. If the idea that you've got in your head is that you're acting on data as you're reading it up from a disk, you have already given up your competitive advantage in the market. Because there's crazy dudes out there like myself who understand that if I have to write it to disk, I've already lost, right? My competitive advantage has been foregone, right? So we spend an enormous amount of time writing reactive and event and actor-driven systems that act on data and deliver that value in microseconds. It's fun because even 2 years ago, we were still dealing in seconds of latency being okay. That's good enough. These days, yeah, we're getting pretty judgy with the performance of our systems. And, we just went, generationally from a telemetry system we designed back in 2017. It's being displaced currently right now. We brought the latency of transaction throughput end to end from about 50 seconds down to 120 microseconds end to end, okay, from the time it hits our data center boundary. Yeah, show me anyone else who can do that, right? Just saying, if you're thinking persistence to disk, if you're thinking through going through traditional RDBMS layers, you've already lost.
So Karthik, when you hear that and you think about what we've done to date and what we need to do in the future, what goes through your head?
No, I think I fully agree with Logan. I think everything is about lower latency, faster, and more, right? Like also the scale, right? Irrespective of the scale.
I know
Um,
what you were actually thinking, Karthik. You were actually thinking whether or not I'd take a job offer. I think that's what you were thinking.
well, that too, but in addition to that, well, yeah, some of the things that we've done really well at and on the Yugabyte side itself is the ability to deliver high performance, right? This is one of the things that went through our heads. Like we had not one but two code bases of databases we knew intimately well, right? That's HBase and that's Apache Cassandra, both written in Java. But we said, you know what, let's not write the third one in Java, or let's not even use anything, even though it's the harder path to building the database. Let's do it in C++ because we need to really make sure, in order to deliver the kind of performance you're talking about, Logan, we'd have to incorporate large memory heaps, a lot of CPUs, very fast NVMe and SSD drives. Like it's an evolution, right? It keeps going on. And so it's better to remain in a language that can speak to the infrastructure much closer without introducing artificial bottlenecks, right? It's harder to do, but it's actually more useful in the end. So that's like one of the things that we're focused on. But I think going forward, I think it just comes down to us just exposing more and more abilities to access data in different forms, like whether it be through other, like just more query richness and feature set that we put in the existing languages, or even new languages that we want to access data through, like search or something, so that we're still able to do exactly what you're looking for, Logan, which is address a wide variety of use cases while still keeping latency low and scale and availability pretty high. The continuous.
That's kind of the uniqueness of chatting with someone like me who's focused on beyond the horizon. The technology doesn't exist yet to do what we want to do. We literally have to go and create it on most days, right? And I think you touch on something is around accessibility and time to value, right? We've got teams of specialist engineers who are extremely well versed in Scala and Akka and the Akka frameworks that we use a lot of, and in Java, of course. And we can write anything, and we can optimize the heck out of that to get to where we're going. For ingestion, persistence, availability of that data. But as you think about time to value, it becomes a question of how do I make that data available to as many people as possible throughout this enterprise so that they can do their job in the context of their particular role, right? And I think that's one of the interesting things that Yugabyte brings to the table is just diversification of accessibility to that data, right? So whether you prefer coming in through a pure play SQL engine, or coming your familiarities around CQL, or you want to go direct API level type access, those are all kind of within the realm of possibility for you. And so meet the developer where they are, right? Don't force them to learn yet another thing. Slows them down, and time to value erodes as a result.
Certainly important to us. I mean, that's one of our foundational points that Karthik's been hitting on for a while. And I was just thinking, Karthik, any other comments on trends that you see around the event processing? I was thinking I work with Kafka and the Confluent Gang and other things like that from Logan's perspective that are going to be helpful from again, the broader ecosystem. It's not obviously not all Yugabyte, right? It's how we complement and really help accelerate time to value, to Logan's point.
Yeah, I would say there's a few interesting things there's a few things that you're working on already, like Bill talked about, like the ability to integrate with Kafka on both ends, like be a sink, right? So to a stream of data coming in that you can write it at high throughput, right? And then query it and keep it current and so on. But also be a source, so you know what data has changed. So you can pull data out of the database in the change data capture kind of format and then feed the downstream systems, right? So that's an important paradigm that's starting to come up, especially as you talk about reactive services and things moving really quickly, right, Logan? Like people don't want to keep even less state and push down the standard processing to something like a database underneath. So that's a pattern that we're seeing clearly, and that's something that we're working on, including asynchronous replication, right, where you want a system to consume it and do different things with it downstream, right? Like as opposed to the system that actually takes the writes, you might want it to serve a subset of the data, or perhaps even all of the data in a different geography. So you still shrinking time, like it's still low latency, but the transfer and how it's maintained and checkpointed and reliably moved across is being pushed down to a lower layer at the infrastructure layer, right? Now, another area that's becoming very interesting, I think you mentioned the edge, right? Like edge computing and universally deployable applications, right, are becoming super interesting in the sense, I mean, you have this interesting paradigm where on the edge you have very high throughput, very high requirements for availability because you just need to get the processing done, right? But you cannot have all these edges, these multiple different edges do their own thing. You need to bring together the essence of what you learned on these different edges to a central brain where you do the a further processing and push it back down to distribute to the edges how they can do their work better and give even more value-added services, right? We're seeing this pattern come up. And the edges could be like temporary data centers. It could be like mobile data centers, like, in the back of a truck or something. It could be like an oil well. It could be like anything, right? It could even be a private data center that somebody else manages and is not one of the public clouds, right? And the central data center can be in a public cloud or a large private cloud, right? So we're seeing these patterns start to emerge, and then the devices themselves start getting interesting. Like in this case, a car, for example, right, would start doing more and more things and would want data in real time. So we're seeing those patterns emerge as well, and a lot of interesting work going into those sides. How do you work with the various different technologies that are getting built around the edge?
Yeah, I think edge, first you kind of got to back up and quantify that, right? What the heck are you talking about when you're talking about an edge, right? The number of pitches and conversations I get into around edge computing in any given week is enough to exhaust you and send you to an early bed, right? But I think for me, what is most important is that the technologists and leaders who are, being bombarded with all of these sorts of ideas around edge computing and edge cloud computing, whether it be with a major cloud provider or a niche player, is keeping a direct line of sight to value for your consumer. Why am I doing things at the edge? Does it even make sense, right? We've had a lot of conversations internally. So I'll sit through 45-minute pitches on edge computing technologies and data persistence, and I think at the end of those pitches I'm often left wondering, what did I just listen to and why are we doing this? It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? People tend not to think about the time to value and what they're actually doing and why they're doing it, right? In a lot of cases I'll see edge architectures that fundamentally didn't need to be there in the first place. I could be at my data center in 10 milliseconds and performing that same workload inside my data center. So I think the important thing that people need to be thinking about is really around their consumer, their end use case that they're trying to support. I'll give you a good example. If I've got a connected vehicle and I'm trying to get a weather service to that vehicle, and I don't have that data necessarily on board, and it's out on the West Coast of the United States, do I come back to my data center on the East Coast to get that weather data, or do I just reach out to a local provider on the West Coast to do it? The answer is locally in that case, right? The distinction, though, would come is if I was enriching that generic data set that's out and available on the net with personalized data or information that comes from my private store in the back office data centers. And it's a distinction that a lot of people really miss, and ultimately either duplicating data sets from their back office out to the edge so that they can support this use case, or they're bringing requests back into their data centers that really had no place even coming to the data center in the first place. There's no value to that. So I think you have to keep a solid mind's eye towards the enrichment opportunity, what we're actually trying to do. And everything I do is through a data first lens. Application developers hate hearing that, but frankly, you're just an accessory to my world. You're a means to an end from a value perspective, and that's probably not very nice, but it's true. Sorry, data rules. You, George.
And one other technology topic I wanted to hit on was just your view on cloud computing. It seems to me that GM has forged a path of leveraging private cloud and your own data centers more than public cloud per se. I know Michael Dell would probably be glad to hear that comment. that you believe in that. But just if you could comment about that, Logan, how maybe you and the team think about cloud computing more broadly. I mean, we've been talking about the edge use case, but then because it's interesting to us because we've got to play across that whole spectrum.
Sure. I completely get it. You're going to hate my answer. Sorry in advance. Cloud computing for me, I've held a number of roles throughout my career, including cloud strategy and bringing cloud systems to market back in the day as well. And the grand irony of the cloud is it has nothing to do with the cloud. And that weighs upon my soul quite heavily, given some of the jobs I've had in the past, right? But what is cloud? It's a delivery vehicle. It's a piece part. It's a component of higher order solutions that actually deliver value, right? It's a deployment model. I would posit, why do we actually care, right? The reality is in my situation, we have extremely expensive data centers that we purposefully built, at this point, a decade plus ago, that house thousands upon thousands of systems. And that's not normal per se for most of the addressable market out there for data management consumers, right? Most folks don't have substantial data center investments, and it's just been more convenient to do that in the cloud, as we say, right? So I think the capability to dynamically consume higher order solutions like Yugabyte or any other distributed SQL or otherwise is really the value proposition, isn't it? Time to value. Like, I can get this done quicker because I'm not doing all of this data center infrastructure stuff. In GM's case, we've got massive private clouds that we've built internally that look just like public cloud architectures, except they're directly under our domain and control, and things like security and governance and the ability to enrich and share data sets broadly throughout the ecosystem give us a competitive market advantage, and are really the reason for existence for our data centers, right? I don't issue cloud. I think it's just, who's the customer in that case, right? I think that the 80th percentile of a public cloud provider is addressing mid-market or lower companies, which are often the same customer that you would share in terms of developing emerging technology. Are you going to design for the 20th percentile of the addressable market that has some really unique and crazy needs like we do on our side? Or are you going to design for the 80th percentile of the addressable market that is going to readily consume those solutions at a very manageable scale and doesn't care to make the investments in physical infrastructure? And so I think the deployment model is absolutely apropos, right? I think the other side is that there's intersections with use cases around edge computing and otherwise that make a lot of sense to go down that path. For me, and the scale that we operate at, exabyte and beyond, and tens of thousands of cores and microsecond level response times, I'm smarter than you and I can build it better than you, but it is purpose built, right? And that's not the reality for most folks consuming these solutions out there. So it's a fair point, well raised, Bill.
Why did you think we wouldn't like your answer?
I don't know. You know what? I'll tell you, cloud sucks. There you go.
Yeah, what?
I don't know why you would. Cloud sucks. I don't know why you. Nobody needs it.
No, we think of it exactly the same way. I mean, it's a vehicle, right? That people want to leverage, great, and we want.
We're all sick of the marketing material, though, aren't we?
That's accurate, but that's true of a lot of things in our world. So we're trying to keep it real. So let's switch gears here a second, Logan, if you don't mind. That I'd like to hear a bit more about, because you and I have spoken about it before, just some of your views on leadership and leading teams and driving innovation versus status quo, and how do you instill confidence and accountabilities in your teams to take things on, the challenges, but still feel safe, right, in what happens if it doesn't work out and they've taken a swing at something. So can you share your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I appreciate you teeing up the softball for me, Bill. This is something I'm wickedly passionate about. I've got a big responsibility around strategic incubation of technology that in a lot of cases when we get involved doesn't exist yet. The problem's not been solved, right? So a lot of my role is saying yes when everybody else says no, or tells you how hard things are going to be, or all the reasons why things can't be done. So my team's routinely on the receiving end of me making impossible commitments to things I have no clue how we're going to go solve. And I'll say it with a smile and ask you how quickly you need it done, right? Much to the groans and chagrins of those around me. But they've also been through the journey a number of times here. And, you know, I think the grand irony of a career in technology is that it has nothing to do with technology. It's all about the people involved in the culture you build around those people and what you do as a leader to support it. So I always gravitate to great leaders and watch very closely how they build their cultures and often that determines the success of the company and the technology that they're creating, right? So for me, we take a number of very simple approaches here that I think, you know, if you don't have your pen at the ready, you probably ought to get one, because this is the distilled knowledge of 30 years of figuring it out the hard way and earning the PhD from Hard Knocks, right? For me, when people join my organization for the first time, one of the first skip levels, and if they're a first level engineer, they get a conversation with me and kind of goes something like this, where we're talking more about their family, their kids, their spouse, the things that they're doing outside the work, their passions, the things that bring them joy. And the reason for that is I want people to go home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and go spend time on those things. Those relationships and those passions are ever present throughout your life, right? The jobs we do during the day are transient. We'll go from job to job, we'll go from career to career, and that's expected. We grow along that journey. And so, you know, I think the fun thing is that from a leader perspective, you know, the ninja mind hack behind it is that by valuing that side of an employee's life, an engineer's life, we are actually removing all of the excuses and barriers as to why I don't get the very best version of someone at 8 a.m. every morning, right? If you're going and prioritizing and doing those things that you value, what excuse do you have not to be in the very best mood and ambitious, engaged, and passionate about the job that you've got assigned to you? And that's all fine, well, and good. People hear that and they're like, wow, that's amazing. You're such a transformed leader, Logan. Come write a book. I'm like, sure, no problem. Here's my retainer. But then they're, you know, my employees are actually very quickly, they're like, well, wait a minute, you know, our whole job is impossible problems, which means you take on impossible missions and set impossible deadlines. And I'm like, yeah, that's also true. My reality is, and the thing that they pay me for is I'm a force multiplier to get more than the sum of the parts out of my organization. So I'm always going to be an aggressive leader with respect to the empowerment, engagement, and my belief in our collective ability to figure it out, right? One of my favorite catch sayings is, you know, someone comes to me with a problem, I turn right back around and I go, you already have everything you need to go solve that problem, figure it out. And off they go, and inevitably they figure it out one way or the other, right? But, you know, there's a lot of, there's some interesting things in there. You know, they're calling me out on the impossible deadlines. And, you know, my answer to that for them is, have you ever come back and asked for an extra week to do the right thing, right? Because you just didn't have enough time. And, you know, I value you going home at the end of the day and spending time on the things that actually matter on a daily basis. And they're like, what? We can do that? And I'm like, yeah, you can. And you probably ought to. And when they do, and, you know, fairly routinely, they'll come back and go, man, we just need like 2 more days on this. That's my job. I'll go reset expectations with our stakeholders and, you know, set them. You know, the reality is, you know, in the same vein that the commitments I'm making are impossible, who else are you going to call? Ghostbusters, right? So if I can't solve it, there's not very many other people who can. So I appreciate your patience as we work through the problem, right? And then that really solves a lot of it and puts people's hearts at ease. So now, wait, I've got an emboldened, empowered, passionate workforce who's charged with going and figuring out where failure is an element of our culture that we value, recognize, and celebrate, right? You know, failure isn't failure until you quit. right? Otherwise, it's simply the acquisition of knowledge on the journey to success. And people think that success is sitting there for 9 months and coming up with the 15,238 requirements to get from A to B, only to learn on the 10th month that the assumptions they made on requirement number 18 were fundamentally incorrect and poisoned the rest of the tree. Congratulations, you just missed a year. And in that time, I've already created the future and outmoded you, outclassed you, outgunned, and outdelivered you on every single avenue. So I think in this day and age, with respect to high performance organizations and cultures, the fun of it is like, get out of the way of your team, put your ego in off to the side here, and position them in a place where they bring their passion and joy for the things that they do on the daily and apply it. Man, just get out of their way and watch them go. Used to be that I was the smartest guy in the room. I'm not anymore. I'm surrounded by smarter people who are a lot more passionate around solving problems than I am. I'd rather be at the beach with margarita or my tie.
So my next question then, because it all makes a lot of sense to me. And, I think, understanding technology and then the people side of it, but then also having the courage to innovate and act and be accountable.
I look at all problems through two lenses, a strategic lens and a tactical lens. The strategic lens for me is the impossible vision. Imagining the world as it ought to be with no boundaries. I don't really care if the technology doesn't exist or otherwise. I'm simply looking at a particular problem and asking myself, is this within the realm of humanity's capability to solve for? And that probably sounds really bold, and it is. But am I wrong? If it is solvable by humanity, then what's preventing you from taking the first step towards solving that problem today? Nothing, really. So mindset is a big element of it. So, if I look at things through a strategic mindset and a tactical mindset, my tactical mindset is going to be very focused on what's the very next thing that I can do, or series of things that I can do that contribute to solving for the strategic vision or our end state. And, the thing that people get hung up on is the journey, right? I don't care about the journey. I'm only focused on the very next thing and saying, oh, okay, well, maybe I go create some VMs and that's the thing that contributes. And once I've created those VMs and I deploy some software on those VMs, I'm going to have more knowledge now about the problem than I did before I did those things, right? Rinse and repeat. You might be there for a couple million times, rinsing and repeating, but I assure you, at the end of the day, you will arrive at your destination and people will be looking back and wondering how the hell you got there.
Yeah.
And those are the same people who couldn't be bothered to take the first step.
Yeah. Basically kind of lean, agile approach towards problem solving.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although I think in things like SAFe and lean, they tend to over focus on the process versus just, can we actually go put hands to keyboard and actually go do some stuff now?
Yeah.
Before you plan me into oblivion?
Yeah, people lose sight of outcome and time to value to your
The reality is my day job is best described as bullshit detector.
Love it.
I think you have to bleep that out.
No, we're good. And before we switch off of this, maybe 2 to 3 things you look for in people you hire at General Motors. If people are out here listening and may want to join the GM team, what will be the things you look for in
I've got a rather unique perspective on identifying talent that would work well with us. I'm looking for a bunch of things. Your background says a lot about you, right? So, in this day and age of pandemic interviewing, and I don't get to see you in person, but you're often at your home desk or otherwise. Yeah, I've fully evaluated everything in your background, and it's telling me a lot about the type of person that's across the table from me. So that's one thing I use a lot of. The other thing I focus in on, quite frankly, is less about the what and more about the character of the individual. Am I talking to someone who's brought passion to the discussion? ambition to the discussion? Are they getting genuinely excited about the conversation and the technology? And this is something that, you know, their engine's already fired up and on. More often than not, it's the single biggest indicator on whether or not you're going to get a job, right? With us, simply because keep in mind, most of the things that I'm doing never been done before. So we're all equivalent on that. I don't know how to do it. Do you know how to do it? Nope. Does Bob know how to do it? Bob's been coding for 47 years. Bob doesn't know how to do this. So in that vein, does it really matter whether you're, you know, 2 months out of university or whether you've been doing this for 30 years? No. You know, the guy who's been doing it for 30 years has a bit of a detector on what won't work. But often that's also debt in the ecosystem. So I spend a lot of time making sure our teams are balanced with folks that are straight out of school and folks that have been doing it and got all the gray beards and all the warts along the way, right? And the reason I do that is, you know, those preconceived notions around how technology and systems work is often a trap, right? It's a bias that doesn't serve us well, right? So when I get the youngsters straight out of college joining us, I'm always fascinated by the new lens with which they look at a particular problem set and bring ideas to the table that we would have never considered, you know, us old fogies that have been doing this since the 70s, right?
It's great. Love it. And maybe let me turn it around a little and say, what do you expect of us? I mean, I was impressed with how you
zeroing out the bill.
What's that?
Zeroing out the bill. Yeah, that's what I expect.
You know, how you led your team, you challenged us, you, there is a note of bill, by the way, but keeping everyone focused and driving towards those outcomes. I guess what would be your observations about us as a partner? Like how can we continue to do that well or do it better as we think about engaging with large enterprises? Obviously, our work is not done at General Motors. We have a lot to go do over the next decade together, but just more curious on your observations of.
Well, I'll offer this to any VC-backed startup out in the industry that's trying to break into large accounts in general. Humble and hungry. I'm pretty sure I've uttered that phrase to you, Bill, on more than one occasion. You know, if you come to me with a transaction in mind, it's not going to get it done. The reality is I've got, you know, a lot of smart people that we can make a decision to go solve a particular problem. So more often than not, startups and even industry incumbents are around a time to value conversation for me. You've already created the thing that I can use and solve higher order solutions with. You know, so what you're ultimately competing with is me, right? And you know, in this particular case, it made a lot of sense for us to focus on, you know, impossible problems while leveraging technology that, you know, Yugabyte has a solid handle on and we felt really comfortable with. But the delta and the differentiator was that there wasn't a handout looking for the transaction. Not to say you didn't have expectations and that they were fair expectations. But you and your entire team were focused on building a long-term strategic relationship with the company, understanding that value gets delivered in multiple ways. It's not always the dollar value on a particular check. A lot of the time, if you're dealing with companies like us and teams like ours that are operating at a different scale and solving problems in a different way than, you know, perhaps the rest of your customer base, you can arguably sit there and go, well, hey, am I gaining experience working with data sets and scales that we just don't have a practical application for in the rest of our customer base? And is that not preparing our product or capability for the future? And I think that was the one biggest thing that, you know, Karthik, Bill, you all understood early on, is that all of this gets bigger with an exponential modifier over the coming years. And so laying that foundation of working credibly with data sets that are well beyond industry expectations today, set you up for the future, set you up for future success. So ultimately, you could argue that, you know, putting up with me and my personality is an investment in your own futures.
Absolutely. Love it. And I do remember you grilling Karthik and Ame pretty well on the technology and what we were about and why we were building what we were building and the rest of it. So it was you were pretty focused back in the day. Karthik, from your side, you've been on the other side of this, listening to Logan engage with General Motors over the last year. Any takeaways from your side?
Yeah, like first off, like when, I do remember the first few conversations we had, Logan, where you were grilling, you were asking about all the nuances, and especially so because I think you rightfully said it, your team is operating at a pretty big scale and they are pretty nuanced and know all the details and, what kind of situations are hard to deal with, what are the real pitfalls in trying to go after building, something for such a large scale. But that also, is interesting to me personally and to all the folks at Yugabyte, because we are solving something that challenges status quo, and we want people that understand it, at least initially in the journey, to differentiate what is the simple linear engineering from what are the real hard problems that need to get solved. And exactly as you said it, it's about laying the base now to be successful a year or two in the future, right? It's not about just build, and the increments of time are not the same, right? What you do early on actually gives you a non-linear return in success, right? Like as a joint success, I mean, right? So so that is incredible to see. Like I always really enjoy working with and like seeing the thought process of people that challenge kind of the status quo of whatever's around them at the time, right? So when you started the journey, or any of these journeys, right, like what you're talking about with respect to public clouds, or like with respect to the edge, or with respect to building a base for the future, or like what type of a future you envision for connected cars and in GM in general, right? All of these might be going against the conventional norm, but that really, seeing that coming from afar, right, is really the most satisfying part, or at least what I get to do with folks.
Well, and to your point, balancing those two things with the addressable market and your ability to generate revenue is really the big thing, right? That's why Bill gets paid the big bucks, is he's good at balancing things.
Exactly.
Not enough. So I know we're about out of time, Logan. Any other closing comments or things that are top of mind for you that that we've covered or not covered so far? It seems like we covered a lot of ground here.
We covered a whole bunch of ground in the last hour or so, Bill. And I encourage people to think bolder, right? Look beyond the horizon, see what is possible, not what you've been asked to do, right? This has ultimately been the secret to our success and our ability to cherry pick the biggest opportunities within the GM ecosystem, is because we're not really focused on what we've been asked to do. We're focused on what the art of the possible is and what that may become in the future. Fortunately, we've been right probably 90% of the time in that laying those foundations are dramatic accelerators in the future. Things that, had we have not laid a foundation around telemetry systems and whatnot, instead of taking a couple of weeks to solve a problem, it might have taken me a couple of years to solve a problem because we didn't lay the foundations.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And obviously there's a lot we plan to do together here over the next 5 or 10 years, which is super exciting. I also did note, Logan, your comment, it didn't matter how expensive it was. So we'll keep that in mind. We negotiate our expansion.
That's right, because by the time you send your next bill, someone else will be sitting in this chair. So you can do whatever you like.
Touche, my friend. And to your point about a job, I think you're doing fine. And I wouldn't even attempt to tell Jerry or Randy or Mary that GM is not the home you should be at. So
you don't want me. I'm fairly lazy at the end of the day. So.
No, it's been a terrific talk, and really appreciate you taking the time, and hope everyone out there has enjoyed the discussion. So thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Thanks,
I will say we are hiring, so do go to careers.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Logan. See you later.
Thanks.
Okay.